Finding Mr. Bridges, the most fascinating man you've never heard of. Hopeless romantic, rock star preacher, leader of men, and parish priest.
My name is Phil Price. I'm the rector of 8 parishes just outside Rugby, including St Nicholas, Willoughby. If you've spent much time in English parish churches, you know they're full of memorials. Often there's many on the walls. Most of the memorials on walls kind of blur into the background and each other. But in St Nicholas, there's one that I couldn't avoid. It grabbed me. Because you see, whenever I stand at the altar to celebrate communion, it's right there in front of me. It's a memorial to a man named Nathaniel Bridges, Doctor of Divinity and Vicar of the parish, who died in 1834. For years, I hardly noticed it. It just blended into all the others. But one Sunday, I actually read the words carved in the stone. The memorial describes a man who was, by nature, a man of talent, by education, a man of learning, but also a preacher who was ardent in declaring the love of the Saviour and unwearied in his labours. Not a bad epitaph for a parish priest. And reading that left me with one simple question. Who was this man? Why has he got this glowing memorial in this church? So I went home and I Googled. And that bit of Googling turned into a bit of a passion project over the course of well over a year. Those of you listening from my parishes, don't worry. It was my day off passion project, not my, when I'm meant to be running 8 parishes, passion project. And whilst what I found, and we've discussed in the previous 4 episodes, is a really interesting story of tragedy, of excitement, of passion, of all sorts of things, that wasn't really what I was looking for. What I wanted to know was why he had a memorial that was so glowing in Willoughby. And that's what we're going to explore this time. Unlike the previous 4 episodes, this is not going to be a proper structured story. This is basically a selection of different newspaper clippings that I came across in my research that paint a bit of a picture of what Bridges was up to. So we're going to start with a clipping from Felix Farley's Bristol Journal from July 1834. And this is an obituary to Nathaniel Bridges.
On the 17th of the month at Willoughby in Northamptonshire, the Reverend Nathaniel Bridges, Doctor of Divinity, passed away in his 85th year. He had served for many years as the incumbent of Willoughby and Hatton, as well as the lecturer of St Nicholas and St Mary Redcliffe in Bristol. A correspondent notes that his character both as a minister and a man will long entitle him to respect. He was distinguished by a remarkable compass of mind, a vivacity of thought, and a strength of memory that seemed almost proof against the effects of old age. He used a pointed, original style of language to communicate on all subjects, especially those of transcendent and eternal interest. Having been familiar with these eternal truths since childhood, he preached and spoke as one whose own experience testified to the power of divine grace. When unfolding the terrors of the law, he never failed to associate them with the love, the invitations, and the promises of Jesus Christ, subjects that clearly filled him with singular fire. From his public and private addresses to his flock, his relief of the poor, and his support of charitable and religious societies, to his correspondence, conversation, and friendship. In a word, both his life and his death proved the grace of the Redeemer, which he viewed as the pledge of everlasting glory.
Wow, it's a good obituary, isn't it? And it some ways it's depressing to go straight to the obituary, but sometimes it does take an obituary to really get to the heart of matters. First thing that I think is really fascinating in terms of what we've said previously on the podcast, he's remembered as the incumbent of Willoughby and Hatton, as well as the lecturer of St Nicholas and St Mary in Bristol. That's fascinating, partly because I think that was really hacked off Samuel Parr, so I think that's a last-minute win for our man Bridges. But it also shows that actually he moved around a fair bit. He had a lot of fingers in a lot of pies. He was at Willoughby, he was at Hatton, it says, and then we've got the fact that he was a lecturer at 2 churches in Bristol. That fact that he was a lecturer in Bristol, and that explains why his obituary is in the Bristol Journal, shows that actually he was a quite impressive preacher, and he was actually a big name, which I think is what we get in this second paragraph. The correspondent notes his character, both as a man and a minister, will long entitle him to respect. So his ministry was powerful, and people valued his ministry, but they also valued his demeanour and his personality. He was distinguished by a remarkable compass of mind, a vivacity of thought, and a strength of memory. Shows that he was incredibly clever. He could deal with quite complex ideas, but he used a pointed, original style of language to communicate on all subjects, especially those of transcendent and eternal interest. So although he was really clever, he had a talent for taking obscure theology and making it relevant and accessible to all the people that he spoke to. And he brought a fire with him when he preached. He preached and spoke as one whose own experience testified to the power of divine grace. Oh, that's a great line, isn't it? And we get a little bit of a sense of what his message was. When unfolding the terrors of the law, he never failed to associate them with love, the invitations and the promises of Jesus Christ, subjects that clearly filled him with singular fire. Amazing. He was passionate. That guy that was rolling around banging his head on the floor in the prayer meetings in Waddenhoe, he took that fire and that passion into the pulpit. And it seems that actually when he talked about the love of Jesus and the promises of Jesus, that brought the fire out of him. And the final thing to note here is that he was a bit of a rock star preacher. He had the gift of the gab and people wanted to listen to him, but he wasn't all talk. He could walk the walk as well. His relief of the poor and his support of charitable and religious societies proved the grace of the Redeemer. So there was a social justice aspect to his ministry. And that's what we're going to think about now in this next clipping.
The committee of the Bristol Penitentiary is grateful for 10 years of support, but we are currently facing serious financial difficulties. These issues stem from a loss of subscribers, rising costs, and increasing demands on our compassion. It is painful to reject those in need, yet we remain in debt. Recently, we had to turn away a 16-year-old girl who was driven from her home by her stepfather. It would be a failure of duty not to appeal to our fellow citizens for help. We are confident that your support will prove that those in misery do not cry out in vain. Donations are gratefully received by our Treasurer, Mr. James Fripp. Signed by order of the committee, Nathaniel Bridges.
So this is a clipping from the Bristol Mirror, and it's an article submitted by Bridges himself seeking donations to help with one of his charities, Bristol Penitentiary. And it shows how hands-on he is with all of this. He's sharing with the wider population the state of this girl that they had to turn away, and he's begging them for donations to help. So he's very much a hands-on trustee of this charity, and he's hands-on trustee of all kinds of charities. So as well as this one, there's another article from him in one of the Bristol newspapers about launching a Bible society. In there's also records of him being a part of the St Mary's Radcliffe visiting society, where he preaches a sermon to raise funds for the institution. And that society's mission was to provide systematic visitation to the poor of the parish and improve both their temporal and spiritual condition. He was also a trustee of the Willoughby Charities, which actually I'm a trustee today. The vicar is ex officio trustee, so I'm following his footsteps in that regard. Although hopefully it's going a bit smoother at present, as there was a bit of a scandal with the Willoughby Charities during Bridges' time. And we're going to have a little look at that now. So I've got an article here from the Leamington Spa Courier from August the 13th, 1831. I'm not going to read the whole article because it's quite a long one, but I'll give you a little summary and I'll read out some interesting little bits from it. So basically, this is a report of a court case between Mr. Wilkinson, who's the schoolmaster of the Willoughby School, and the trustees of the Willoughby Charity. Here's what has happened is the trustees have broken into the school and chucked Mr. Wilkinson, his wife, his children, his servants, and his furniture into the streets in what is described as the most insulting and harsh manner. Now, whilst Bridges is a trustee of that charity, he doesn't seem to have been caught up in this court case. Let me read you a little bit. It says, the defendants, it was stated, were the trustees of the Willoughby Charity, which was for many years the most secretive and mysterious character. But by the zeal of the present incumbent, Dr. Bridges, its secrets have been partially disclosed. So Bridges has become a trustee of this charity, and he's seen that it's incredibly cloak and dagger and under the radar, and governance is all over the place. So he's slowly sort of set about trying to make things a little less vague and a little bit more obvious and a little bit more above board. And it seems like while he was out of town, probably in Bristol, some of the other trustees have decided to take matters into their own hands, and they've decided that they want shot of the schoolmaster. So they have marched in and chucked him out. And the schoolmaster's not happy about it and has taken them to court for trespass. And so the testimony that's going to settle this is actually the testimony of Bridges' curate, Reverend Chambers, and the newspaper article records his testimony. He says, I remember Malin, one of the trustees, saying he should like to have a fresh master, about August 1830, I think. Also Malin said as long as he was trustee, he would never give Wilkinson anything. I have been in the school twice a week, and I have never heard anything of Dr. Bridges having expressed a desire for Wilkinson's removal. I have heard Wilkinson say that he had taken a good deal from the trustees and would not have his character bullied. I believe the school is well managed. I have been to the school as a friend, not officially. At least 9 of the trustees were present at the meeting when he was dismissed. Here is Bridges isn't present in the courtroom, so his curate, Reverend Chambers, is becoming kind of his voice in the courtroom. And what he says is really fascinating, isn't it? He says, I have never heard anything of Dr. Bridges having expressed a desire for Wilkinson's removal. So that seems to be quite an important point that's being made. Actually, Dr. Bridges, the vicar, doesn't think he should have been sacked. That's important. And he also says, I believe the school is well managed. So he's kind of sticking up for the school as well. And then finally he says, court rules in favour of Mr. Wilkinson. And it's on a bit of a technical matter, but it basically says they needed 10 trustees to vote in favour to evict him. And at the time when they decided to evict him, there were only 5 trustees. So they fined in favour of him, and the charity is fined £15. It's interesting, isn't it? Because that whole debacle happened because he wasn't around. We read in that newspaper article that he was actually doing work with the trustees of the charity, trying to make it better, trying to get on top of the governance, get the right number of trustees. But he was often away, so say probably in Bristol. But we shouldn't think that means that he was an absentee vicar when it came to Willoughby. He did genuinely spend a lot of time there. As we saw, he was making inroads with getting the charity a bit more ordered we saw in the testimony of James Chambers that he obviously saw Bridges enough to say with confidence, I've never heard him speak of wanting to get rid of Mr. Wilkinson. And the other really big indicator that people of Willoughby saw him an awful lot is the fact that we have been told in many sources that his preaching was so popular that they had to build a balcony in the church to accommodate all the people that came to hear him preach. His preaching was so popular that people would come from all around to hear him preach, including the neighbouring villages like Gramborough and Wolframcote, which for me is a really interesting development because I am the vicar of Gramborough and, well, technically Wolframcote still, although we think of it as Flecknoe now. But it's interesting, isn't it, that as a vicar of a multi-parish benefice, I really do want my parishioners to travel around to be able to see them in different places and form one big community. Whereas when Nathaniel Bridges was around and they were all separate with their own vicars, then there were vicars in Gramborough and Wolframcote tearing their hair out because people were going to Willoughby to hear the preaching, whereas I'd be doing cartwheels in the churchyard if all the people from Gramborough and Flecknoe were going to Willoughby to hear me preach when there weren't services in those two parishes. This is one of the things that fascinates me about Nathaniel Bridges as I've been researching him, because he's incredibly ahead of his time. In the modern Church of England, many rural parishes like mine are bundled up together in benefices. I'm in the slightly larger end with 8 parishes, but it's not uncommon to see 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or even more parishes kind of bundled together sharing a vicar. But that wasn't the way it was done back in the 18th and early 19th century. Bridges is a bit of a trailblazer in that he's deliberately set up a bit of a unit. He's the incumbent of Willoughby and to some extent Hatton as well, as his obituary says. But he's also this lecturer in Bristol, and he's also had this lasting impact on these 2 parishes in Northamptonshire. So he's got this kind of network going on in these different parishes. And unlike modern multi-parish benefices, they're not all next door to each other. They're spread out across the country. And when we look at the impact of James Chambers in Willoughby, the guy that was called up to give evidence at the trial, we can see that he had this network and he was building a network of curates and assistants that were doing gospel ministry across the board in these different places. And we see it in Allingbury as well, don't we, with poor old James Benamore, whose ministry was tragically short in Allingbury. But we see the impact he had on the life of Fanny Young. It's interesting that Bridges had these curates all around the place. And while some of them show up on the clergy records that I've been checking, not all of them do. So it does make me wonder if, while some of them might have been properly sanctioned by the powers that be, if there had been a few of his assistants that were employed under the table, as it were, without bothering to get the permissions of the relevant authorities that would have been needed to license them to be doing the ministry. I think Bridges was just getting on with what worked without overly thinking about the legality, which might link back to his attitude when he took on that swap with Samuel Parr. We're very nearly finished now, but I'm aware that I teased you with the proposal in episode 1, and then in episode 4 I told you that Fanny Young said no, and then I just breezily said at the end he married someone called Catherine, and I've not told you anything about Catherine, and I've not been able to find out much about Catherine. All I've been able to find out is that they were happily married for a long time and that she lived and worked with him. Found a letter from Bridges to Roth written a year after Catherine has died. She died about 2 years before Bridges, and in it he simply muses that he is fine and cheerful when he's in company, but when he's alone, there's pangs as he misses his wife, and he doesn't think life will ever be the same again without her. That's all I could find about her, which in some ways makes me feel really sad because she sounds amazing. But at the same time, maybe that's testament to her, to someone that can turn up, walk alongside this great man and not get her name everywhere, but enable him to do what he did. Because I'm sure he couldn't have done everything he did without her love and without her support. So now we really are at the end. My journey began by spotting the memorial to Bridges in Willoughby Church, which I just thought was a very glowing memorial. Maybe want to find out more about him. But believe it or not, he's got an even more glowing memorial in Bristol. It was a memorial that was crowd-funded in the time. It had lots of people contributing towards the cost of inscribing it, which includes one person listed who's just simply down as a very young friend who gave 2 and 6. So I want to give the final word to that very young friend who just gave 2 and 6 to remember Nathaniel Bridges. So this is the text of his memorial in Bristol. To the memory of Nathaniel Bridges, D.D., Vicar of Willoughby and Hatton, and for 28 years, lecturer of this parish. He died on the 17th of July, 1834, aged 86 years. In him were combined these estimable qualities which render social intercourse delightful and make public ministrations a blessing: gospel simplicity, deep uniform piety, unremitting zeal for the spiritual interests of the people, and the unbounded benevolence were his distinguishing characteristics. Firmly attached to the established Church of England, yet rose superior to party prejudices and loved all who loved his master. In him the Church of Christ has lost a faithful labourer and a successful minister. Marble will moulder, monuments decay, time sweeps memorials from earth away, but lasting records are of Bridges given. The date eternity, the arch is heaven. There, living tablets with his worth engraved stand for ever and ever in the souls he saved.